The last thing we're going to add here is a particle emitter inside of the worm that when you wiggle your head, it'll emit some dust. So we'll go into the worm and we'll just put it inside the face mesh just so it's locked in place right where we need it. Right click, add a particle system. You can see that's tied to my nose, so that's good. We'll change this one from a point to a plane. And we can increase this just so it's about the width of the worm, maybe 0.15. And then we'll rotate it so it's 90 degrees in the X. And then we can make the Y size quite a bit bigger, maybe 0.3. And we want to match the direction of these other particles. So for this one, we're going to use a force, an acceleration, and it's not going to be in the Y, but the X direction. And in our case, it'll be a negative, maybe 0.5. That looks like it's about the right speed. Now for the birth rate, we're going to add a patch. And for this one, we want to calculate the speed of the head. So if we're moving around, we want it to emit particles. So we need to grab the face position. I'm just going to drag this down and add a value patch. And this doesn't actually do anything, but it just takes the value from here and just puts it down here so we can work with it. So we need to subtract a value from a delayed value. So what this is doing is it's taking the position of the head, and then we're going to delay it by 0.1 seconds. And then we're going to subtract that from this original value. So as we move, this result will increase the faster we're moving because the difference between this value and the delayed value will be greater. So if I click here, you can see it's a very small number. But as I move my head, it gets quite a bit larger, but not that large, so we'll need to multiply it. And we want the birth rate to be somewhere between like 20 and 50. So let's try multiplying by 10. Looks like that we're getting around 0.5, so let's try 100. Looks like we're getting up into the 6 or 7 range. So I think another 0 to 1,000. Now we're getting double digits. I saw 50 there, so that might be enough. And right now, even though we only see one value, these are vector 3s. So maybe let's just change these to vector 3 just so we can see exactly what we're working with. And the birth rate can only be one number. So what we could do is we could unpack this, add all 3 values, and then divide by 3. So that would get the average of speeds of all 3 directions. Or we can just grab one of these values. I think the X value is good because you naturally want to move left and right in this filter at least. So we can just grab a swizzle. And by default, it's set to X already, which is this value. So now we're just having a single value of the X. So if we put that into the birth rate, so you can see when I'm moving to the left, nothing happens, but when I move to the right, something does happen. So I think we need to take the absolute value of this, because in one direction we're having a negative value. So if we use an absolute patch, that will just remove the negatives and make them positive. Now it works in both directions. You can see it's emitting when I go left or right. And because we're only using the X, we can change these back to 0 and maybe increase this to 2000, just so there's a bit more to work with. And I'm actually going to use the same material we're using for this other dust. So in materials, click that and use dust storm. And you can see there's alpha issues. So let's grab this and add it to a new layer. I'm just going to turn up this value really high so we can see what we're doing better. So to make sure the particles are getting in front of this shape, in front of the worm. Let's turn up the speed a little bit. Let's try 0.5. Now you can see they're kind of being shot forward and being blown to the side. I think these big particles are overlapping the small particles, and that's why we're not seeing these a lot of the time. So I am going to duplicate this material. And for this one, we're going to ignore all the depth. And then we need to add it to that emitter. There we go. Now you can see the particles. I'll rename this to Shake Dust. And the particles might be a little big because they just look like poof balls. So in the particle size, let's turn the scale to 0.002. And then I think we need to increase this value even more. It seems like a high number, but you can see the total particles up here doesn't get too crazy just because this actual value is quite small. It looks like 100,000 might actually be working pretty well. And now in this new material, I'll rename it to Dust Shake. And I'll increase the brightness a little bit just so they come out more. Just so you can see it. And there you have it. We rigged up this great asset and added some environmental effects and some interactivity.